A routine court hearing, a 16-year-old boy, a stolen dog tag, and a cop who thought no one was watching. But when the judge walks in, everything flips. What happens next will leave you speechless. This isn't just about justice. It's about power, legacy, and a quiet resistance that sparks a storm. Don't miss it. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that hit harder than headlines. You're going to feel this one. At 16 years old, Malik Freeman had already mastered the art of being invisible in rooms that saw too much and understood too little. He wasn't loud. He didn't wear the kinds of clothes that drew attention. He didn't flinch when adults sized him up. And yet, somehow, he was always the one people watched a beat too long. Like silence itself made them uneasy. That morning, the air had the weight of something unspoken. Gray clouds drifted low over the county courthouse, a blocky cement structure that had stood for decades as both symbol and warning. Inside those walls, things were decided. Fates, names, stories, all with the scratch of a pen or the slam of a gavel. Malik didn't expect much from the day. Just a brief hearing. A misunderstanding. That's what they had called it. A minor incident at school. A heated hallway argument over a phone that wasn't his. A teacher who assumed too quickly, and a system that moved even faster. They said 10 minutes, maybe 15. Still, he dressed like it mattered. A pressed navy button-up, jeans with no rips, clean sneakers. But the most important thing he wore wasn't part of any dress code. It rested just below his collarbone, cool to the skin, heavy with memory. A silver dog tag, battered at the edges, the name Darius Freeman etched deep in the metal. U.S. Marines, killed in action. Afghanistan, 4 years earlier. His older brother had only been 22. Malik hadn't taken the tag off since the day they placed it in his hand at the funeral, wrapped in a trembling black-gloved palm. The chain wasn't flashy, not military-issued anymore. His grandmother had cleaned and rethreaded it with a softer link so it wouldn't break. Malik wore it because it grounded him, because it reminded him that someone had fought to give him the right to walk into buildings like this one and keep his head high. That meant something, especially here. "Ready," came a voice beside him, low but solid. It was Lorraine Freeman, his grandmother, 78 years old, with posture like a soldier, and a face carved by time, not surrender. She stood by the front door, her coat wrapped tight, one hand on the handle of her cane, the other clutching a folded document, the court summons. She had been a nurse in the civil rights movement, tending to bruised bodies after marches and sit-ins, always with a clean pair of gloves and a mind full of scripture. But today, she carried no scripture, only steel. Malik gave a small nod. His words caught in his throat, so he didn't force them. Lorraine didn't press. She just opened the door and stepped out into the chill morning, her boots crunching softly against the sidewalk. Malik followed, slipping his hoodie over his head, the chain settling beneath the fabric with a small metallic whisper. They didn't speak on the drive downtown. They never needed to. Lorraine kept one hand on the wheel and the other steadying the steering column, eyes focused, face still. Malik stared out the window. Buildings passed, a church, a shuttered gas station, a line of kids waiting for the bus. The courthouse came into view slowly, like a mountain at the end of a long road. Gray, tall, indifferent. The parking lot was half full. Lawyers in gray suits with overstuffed briefcases walked with speed. A mother held her son's hand tightly as they approached the side door. A deputy leaned against the front pillar, sipping from a plastic cup, his sunglasses reflecting nothing but sky. Lorraine stepped out of the car first. She walked slow but deliberate, her cane tapping softly like a heartbeat on the concrete. Malik followed one step behind, the wind pulling gently at the hem of his shirt. The dog tag under his hoodie shifted, swaying with each step, like it too remembered the weight of courtrooms and verdicts and uniformed men who asked the wrong questions in the wrong tone. They moved through security without a word. Malik slipped off his hoodie, revealed the tag to the metal detector, felt the eyes of the deputy pause on it a moment too long. But no one said anything. Yet, the courtroom hallway was colder than expected. Malik could smell the sharp tang of floor cleaner and something older. Wood polish, maybe, or nerves. Long wooden benches lined the wall. He sat near the far end, hands folded, shoulders square, spine straight, like his grandmother had taught him. Lorraine took the seat beside him, her purse in her lap, her eyes scanning the hall slowly, like a field medic surveying a scene for wounds no one else could see. For a moment, nothing moved. Malik touched the tag beneath his shirt. Not to show it, just to feel it. He did that sometimes, when school felt heavier than usual, when he walked past uniformed men and couldn't tell if the way they looked at him was casual or calculated. The tag was his anchor, his memory, his proof that someone had believed he was worth protecting. A door down the hall creaked open. Malik's head lifted slightly, but it wasn't his public defender. It was something else. A man stepped out, tall, broad, uniform sharp enough to cut. White, late 50s. His badge read, Ramsey. His boots echoed like they were looking for something to crush. Malik recognized the type instantly. The walk, the glance, the presence. Ramsey's eyes swept the hallway once, then locked onto Malik with clinical interest. He stared, not curious, not uncertain, just calculating. The way you look at a puzzle piece that doesn't belong in your box. Lorraine saw it too. Her hand tightened ever so slightly on her cane. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. But the space around her seemed to harden. Ramsey didn't approach. Not yet. He just watched. Watched a boy sitting too straight, wearing a chain that felt too symbolic. A quiet boy, which somehow in this world always read as threat. Malik didn't fidget. He didn't look away. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't the first time he'd felt someone measuring him with their eyes, weighing his worth against a list of assumptions. But today felt different. He didn't know why yet. He only knew that something in the air was shifting. That the silence in the hallway wasn't peace. It was pressure. And under it, the chain at his chest felt warmer than before. Like it knew something was coming. Like it was bracing for the moment it would be tested. And that moment wasn't far away. The silence in the courthouse hallway was thick enough to chew, the kind that didn't just sit. It pressed. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering slightly like they too were uneasy. Malik sat unmoving on the cold wooden bench, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Still. Calm. A quiet kind of defiance. His grandmother, Lorraine, beside him, didn't speak, but every inch of her body hummed with awareness. She'd seen this before. Felt this tension press against her skin like static just before a storm. That's when he appeared. Deputy Cole Ramsey, 6'2", early 50s, with skin the color of dried paper, and a jaw that looked locked in place since 1987. His uniform was crisp, creased at the elbows and chest like he ironed it with his fists. Boots heavy and deliberate. Everything about him said he'd been doing this job too long, and no one had told him no in years. He stepped into the hallway like it was his. His eyes scanned the corridor quickly, filed, filtered, and dismissed. The nervous young couple near the bailiff desk, the woman shuffling papers behind the counter, the clerk walking too fast with a laptop in his hands. But then he saw Malik, and he stopped walking. Something about the boy made Ramsey slow down. Not fear, not suspicion, Not really. It was the stillness, the composure. It didn't fit. Malik didn't fidget, didn't tap his feet or check his phone. He just sat, shoulders square, hands folded, head up. Not disrespectful, but not deferential either. And then Ramsey saw the chain, the dog tag, just a glint of silver against the navy of Malik's shirt, peeking from beneath the collar like a secret someone dared to wear out loud. Ramsey squinted. Military? Gang? Pretend? He didn't know. But what he did know was that a black kid sitting too still in a government building wearing what looked like military bling needed a reminder of where he stood. He walked slowly toward the bench. Malik didn't move. Lorraine's fingers tightened slightly around the head of her cane, but she didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew that sound. Boots on tile. The rhythm of power when it walks, like it owns every hallway it enters. Ramsey stopped just a few feet away. "You waiting on someone?" he asked, voice flat and casual, like the beginning of a script he'd used 100 times. Malik turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question. "I've got a hearing," he said. Voice steady, respectful, but not small. Ramsey tilted his head. "Hearing, huh? For what?" "School misunderstanding," Malik answered. Ramsey didn't smile. He didn't even blink. "Uh-huh," he said, dragging the syllables out like he was chewing on them. Then his eyes dropped, right back to the chain. He stared at it, just a second too long. Long enough for Malik to feel the weight shift in the room. "What's that?" Ramsey asked, nodding toward Malik's chest. Malik instinctively touched the dog tag beneath his shirt. "It belonged to my brother," he said. Ramsey's eyebrow twitched. "Marine?" he asked, tone suddenly sharp like he didn't believe it. "Yes, sir." "What unit?" Malik didn't answer. Partly because he didn't owe him that. Mostly because the question didn't come from curiosity. It came from suspicion. Ramsey stepped a little closer. Lorraine shifted her cane slightly, the rubber tip making the faintest squeak on the tile. "You got ID on that?" Ramsey asked. Malik blinked. "Sir? The chain. You got proof it's yours?" Lorraine finally looked up. Just a glance, but the kind that could freeze a room. "It was given to him by the family," she said firmly. "After my oldest grandson was buried with full honors at St. Joseph's." Ramsey paused. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked back at Malik like he was the one being disrespectful, like the very act of carrying his brother's memory was some kind of offense. "Lot of kids out here wearing stuff they didn't earn," Ramsey muttered. Malik said nothing. The silence between them stretched wide. "You know, I've seen this before," Ramsey continued, folding his arms now. "Kids showing up with fake IDs, stolen tags, medals they bought online. Makes them feel tough, I guess." "It's not for show," Malik said. His voice was quieter now, but sharper. "It's for him." Ramsey didn't flinch, but something changed in his expression. A flicker of irritation, of threat. "Watch your tone," he said flatly. "You're in a courthouse, son." Lorraine stood up. The movement was slow, but unshakable. She didn't say a word. She just stood. And in that motion, something shifted again. A memory in Ramsey's eyes, of protest lines and marching feet, of women in church hats with Bibles and bandages, of the kind of presence that didn't need noise to make itself known. Ramsey looked at her, then back at Malik. He studied the tag again. "You don't look like no Marine's brother," he said finally. That sentence didn't land like a jab. It landed like a slap, subtle, but stinging. Malik's jaw tightened. Lorraine's breath caught just slightly. "You don't know what I look like," Malik said. His voice wasn't raised, not even loud, but every syllable was wrapped in something ancient. Grief, truth, fire. Ramsey narrowed his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't quite shape the next insult without drawing attention. "You'll want to tuck that in before you go inside," he muttered, gesturing to the chain. "Might give people the wrong idea." Malik didn't move. He didn't tuck anything. He didn't respond. He just stared at Ramsey until the man looked away. That moment hung in the air like a warning. Ramsey turned without another word and walked down the hallway, boots once again echoing, this time louder than before. Malik exhaled slowly, fingers brushing the dog tag again. Not to check if it was still there, just to remind himself he was. Lorraine sat down again beside him, her cane resting against her knee, her voice soft but firm. "Don't let him rattle you," she said. "Men like him feed off the sound." Malik nodded once, eyes forward again. The tension hadn't gone, but neither had he, and something told him Ramsey wasn't finished. But neither was he. The hallway was quiet again, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that follows a stare down, where something unspoken still hangs in the air, like static before lightning. Malik hadn't moved since Deputy Cole Ramsey walked away. He could still feel the weight of that stare, the way the officer had examined him like a problem to be solved, not a person to be respected. Lorraine hadn't said much either. She sat beside her grandson, hands folded neatly in her lap. But her eyes were scanning the hallway like a soldier waiting for the next shot. Malik touched the dog tag beneath his shirt again. Not nervously. Just reflex. A reminder. A breath. His brother's name was still etched in the metal. His story still clung to the chain like smoke from a battlefield. That necklace had been through too much to become the subject of some random power trip. And yet, something in Ramsey's eyes said it wasn't over. And it wasn't. The moment broke like glass under a heavy boot. Malik had just shifted on the bench, just slightly, barely perceptible, when the footsteps returned. This time heavier, closer, faster. Ramsey. He was back, his face unreadable but his body language buzzing with something dark and self-assured. Like a man who'd decided something in private, and now meant to make it public. Without a word, he stepped directly in front of Malik. Malik looked up, eyes calm but alert. And then it happened. No warning, no order, no hesitation. Ramsey's hand shot forward like a whip, his fingers curled around the chain, and he ripped. The metallic crack echoed in the hallway, short, brutal, unmistakable. The clasp broke, the chain snapped free, and for a second, time didn't move. Malik's body recoiled instinctively, not in fear, but in shock. His head jerked back. His hand flew up to his neck, where the cold metal had just been resting a heartbeat ago. The pain wasn't deep, just a sting. But it wasn't the pain that mattered. It was the violation, the suddenness, the audacity. Ramsey held the dog tag in front of Malik's face like a trophy. He dangled it by the broken chain, letting it swing slightly between them. "I told you this didn't belong," he muttered. The words dropped like poison. Down the hallway, the courthouse staff froze. A bailiff standing by the courtroom door stiffened. A young lawyer coming out of a side room stopped mid-step, folder still in hand. A janitor pushing a mop paused mid-swipe. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had seen it. But no one moved, except Lorraine. She stood, deliberate, silent, a storm in stillness. She didn't shout. She didn't point. She just straightened to her full height, 5 feet and 3 inches of spine, steel, and history. Her cane tapped once against the floor like punctuation. Her eyes locked on Ramsey with a fury that came not from panic, but from memory. From decades of watching men like him do things like this and walk away clean. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she asked, not loud, but clear. Clear enough to cut. Ramsey turned to her with a tight smile that barely disguised his smugness. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he said, confiscating suspicious items. This boy walked into court wearing unverified military identification. Could be impersonation, could be gang-related, could be anything. He shrugged, as if that explained everything. Malik hadn't moved. His hands were still at his chest, touching the spot where the chain had been. His breathing had quickened, but his face remained composed. The rage was there, yes, but buried beneath years of training. Stay calm. Don't give them a reason. "That's my grandson's," Lorraine said. "It belonged to his brother, a Marine, a good man, dead 4 years, buried in uniform. That chain is all he has left." Ramsey turned the tag over in his hand, squinting at the engraving like it might suddenly reveal a lie. "Sure it is," he muttered. And then, without ceremony, he dropped the tag into his coat pocket. Malik flinched, not visibly, but inside, something cracked. Lorraine stepped forward. She wasn't trembling. Her voice didn't rise, but every word she said next landed with weight. "You humiliated him," she said, "in front of strangers, in front of me. And for what? Because he sat too straight? Because he wore something you didn't think he deserved?" Ramsey didn't respond. He just adjusted his belt and said, "It'll be filed as evidence." Then he turned and walked away. Calm, casual, like he hadn't just ripped a boy's grief from his neck and called it procedure. The hallway stayed silent, but the silence had changed. It wasn't stillness anymore. It was pressure, the kind that builds before a building groans. Malik's chest rose and fell, but his face didn't move. He reached slowly for his hoodie on the bench, pulled it back over his head, and tucked his hands into the front pocket. He didn't want to cry, didn't want to speak, didn't want to give the hallway the spectacle it was waiting for. But inside, a war had begun, and the casualty wasn't just a dog tag, it was dignity. The bailiff by the courtroom door finally cleared his throat. "Case number 23, Freeman." Lorraine turned to Malik. He nodded once and stood, slower than usual. The skin at his neck burned slightly from the torn chain, but he didn't reach for it, didn't touch it. As they walked toward the courtroom doors, Ramsey stood there again, this time inside the chamber, leaned against a table near the prosecution desk, chatting with another officer like nothing had happened. Like Malik was already erased. Lorraine followed her grandson through the door, but she glanced once, just once, at Ramsey, and something in her look said this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courtroom was cold. Too cold. Like someone had drained the heat from the air on purpose. The kind of cold that didn't just chill your skin, but found its way inside your bones. Malik Freeman stepped through the double doors with his grandmother at his side, every step heavy with what had just happened in the hallway. The chain that had rested against his chest only minutes earlier was now gone, stuffed into the pocket of a man who wore a badge like it gave him permission to take things that didn't belong to him. The silence didn't lift when Malik entered. It tightened. The few people already seated in the gallery barely looked up, but they felt it. Something had shifted. Something sour. Something raw. He could feel their eyes, those who glanced too quickly and then away, and those who avoided his gaze entirely. The dog tag may have been out of sight, but its absence was loud. Malik's public defender, a young woman with nervous eyes and a stack of manila folders clutched like armor to her chest, motioned for him to sit beside her. She looked fresh out of law school, maybe 26, maybe 27, but already worn at the edges by a job that demanded too much and gave too little. She leaned over when Malik sat down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything okay?" Malik didn't respond. Not at first. He stared ahead, lips pressed tight, neck still aching from the sudden snap of the chain. He gave a slow nod, not because he was okay, but because he didn't have the words for what wasn't. Behind them, Lorraine Freeman took a seat in the second row, her cane resting upright between her knees, hands clasped over its handle like a prayer held in place. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes never left the man who had taken her grandson's only piece of his brother. She watched Deputy Cole Ramsey enter the courtroom like he was walking into a barbecue instead of a legal proceeding. Ramsey sauntered in with a grin tugging at one side of his mouth, laughing under his breath at something one of his colleagues had said. His voice bounced off the walls, louder than necessary, filling the space like a bad song on repeat. His badge caught the overhead light. His pockets still held the stolen chain, and he acted as if nothing had happened, because in his mind, nothing had. He leaned against the prosecution's table, arms folded, voice relaxed, completely unbothered. No one confronted him. No one asked what had happened in the hallway. Not the bailiff, not the clerks, not the assistant district attorney flipping through her notes like she hadn't heard the crack of a chain being torn from a boy's neck just minutes earlier. That was the most suffocating part, not the theft itself, but the vacuum that followed it. The non-response, the deliberate decision by every adult in the room to treat the incident as invisible, like it was dust swept under a bench, like it hadn't been a violation but an inconvenience to be ignored. Malik sat with his back straight, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He could feel the redness at the base of his neck where the chain had been. It wasn't bleeding, but it burned, and still, no one looked at him long enough to see it. His name hadn't even been called yet, but the courtroom had already decided what he was: a minor case, a disruption, a kid in a hoodie with a face too calm and too dark to be anyone's son, anyone's grief, anyone's hero. He could hear Ramsey's voice again from a few feet away. "Probably pulled it off a pawn shop rack," Ramsey muttered, gesturing with an invisible hand, eyes still gleaming with smug satisfaction. The prosecutor didn't laugh, but she didn't frown either. She just kept flipping her notes. Malik clenched his jaw, staring at the judge's bench, still empty. He didn't know who was presiding over his case. Didn't care. Because from where he sat, it didn't matter. Judges came and went. So did lawyers and deputies and bailiffs. But the system? The weight of it? The silence it encouraged? That stayed. His public defender shuffled some papers, then checked the clock on the wall. Malik glanced around the room. The gallery had begun to fill, quiet voices, soft coughs, footsteps echoing on polished tile. But none of it felt like progress. None of it felt like anyone here was going to do what was right. And Ramsey? He stood there like a man who had already won. He leaned in to whisper something to another deputy. They both chuckled. Malik saw it out of the corner of his eye. So did Lorraine. But neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Because they had learned, a long time ago, that speaking too soon in a room like this could cost you everything. Then the side door near the bench opened. The judge stepped in. Black robes, poised shoulders, confident stride. The courtroom rose. So did Malik. So did Ramsey. But something in the room shifted, again, as the judge crossed the floor and took her seat. It was subtle. Not a gasp. Not a murmur. But a collective tightening of attention. The kind of shift that comes when someone walks into a room not to perform, but to command. The judge adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. This court is now in session. Case number 2419, State of South Carolina versus Malik Freeman. Malik's name rang louder than it should have. He sat. The judge looked up from her paperwork for the first time, and that's when it happened. Malik's breath caught. Not from nerves, not from fear, from recognition. Because sitting behind the bench, in full judicial robes, presiding over this courtroom, was his mother, Judge Nia Freeman. She hadn't made eye contact yet. Not directly. Her expression was even, professional. But Malik knew that face better than any. She had seen it. She knew. And so did Ramsey. Though his grin faltered just slightly, he hadn't put it together. Not yet. Not fully. But the dog tag in his pocket? The one he'd yanked from a teenage boy's neck like it was trash? That wasn't evidence anymore. It was about to become the fuse. And Malik, quiet, still, invisible no more, was already the flame. Judge Renata Freeman took her seat behind the bench with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. She moved with the precision of someone who had long ago mastered the balance between presence and restraint. Someone who had stood in rooms full of men trying to question her right to be there, and never blinked. She smoothed the front of her robe, adjusted the microphone, and opened the docket folder before her without rushing a single breath. From the gallery, she looked like every other judge who had presided over that courtroom, composed, seasoned, unreadable. But to Malik Freeman, sitting at the defendant's table with his heart pounding in his chest and his hands still trembling from what had just been taken from him, she wasn't just the judge. She was his mother, and she had seen it. At first, no one else in the room connected the dots. The last name, Freeman, didn't spark recognition. Not yet. After all, it was a common name in the South, and no one expected that kind of connection, the kind that would tie the boy at the defense table to the woman in the robe. But the truth sat there between them like electricity, invisible but humming. Renata's gaze flicked up from her docket for only a moment, just enough to catch sight of her son. Malik, sitting stiff-backed, eyes forward, a tight line drawn across his face that only she would recognize for what it really was. Contained fury. Not rage. Not rebellion. But pain. The kind that had no place in a courtroom but had somehow been dragged in with him by the very people meant to uphold the law. And then her eyes shifted again, toward the prosecution's table, where Deputy Cole Ramsey leaned against the edge of a chair like he owned the room. His smirk hadn't faded yet. He was still chuckling under his breath, occasionally whispering to a younger officer beside him, clearly unaware or unconcerned about the weight of what he had just done. She saw the way his hand casually brushed his coat pocket. That pocket. The one where she knew, without doubt, he had stashed the dog tag. The one that used to rest on her oldest son's chest before he left for Afghanistan and never came back. Renata Freeman did not react. She didn't flinch, didn't lift her chin, didn't narrow her eyes. But something in the room shifted anyway. A stillness, a pressure. Because while no one else knew who Malik was to her, she knew exactly who Ramsey was to the world. A man with power. A man with a pattern. And now, a man who had made the worst mistake of his life. He had humiliated her child in her courtroom, thinking he was just another kid with no one watching. Renata turned the page in her docket. No tremble in her fingers, no emotion on her face. But inside, a storm had started. Malik sat perfectly still. He didn't dare glance at her. Didn't try to communicate with his eyes what he was feeling. He didn't need to. They had lived too many lives together in this system to waste time on signals. She had taught him, since he was small, how to navigate rooms like this, how to carry himself with quiet gravity, how to be present without being prey. And now it was her turn. The prosecutor cleared her throat and began reading out the basic details of the case. The school incident, the mistaken identity, the recommendation for dismissal due to lack of evidence. Malik barely heard it. He was watching Ramsey from the corner of his eye. The way the man stood with his chest puffed, like what had happened in the hallway, didn't exist. Like it wasn't real. But it was real. Malik could still feel the burning where the chain had been ripped from his skin. He could still hear the snap of the clasp. And he knew Knew. His mother had heard it too, because she had arrived before anyone else noticed, and she hadn't missed a second. Ramsey shifted slightly, unaware, still too relaxed, still unaware of what the room was becoming. He spoke again, too loud. "Just for the record, Your Honor," he said, stepping forward like a man giving testimony. "The defendant arrived wearing what appeared to be unauthorized military identification. Given the current environment, I felt it appropriate to confiscate the item as possible evidence of misrepresentation." Malik stiffened. Lorraine straightened in the gallery. Ramsey reached into his pocket, pulled out the dog tag, and held it aloft with a casual flick of his wrist, like it was a prop, like it meant nothing. "It looked like it came from a pawn shop," he added, chuckling as he turned it over in his fingers. The courtroom watched. The chain swung lightly. Renata Freeman didn't move, but the pause in her expression, just the smallest delay in her response, told those who were watching closely that something had cracked. She reached for her pen, set it down, then lifted her eyes fully. Her gaze landed first on Malik, then on Ramsey, and in that moment, for those paying attention, the air in the room changed. It got heavier, not louder, not more dramatic, just more real, like the room finally understood that something bigger than a juvenile hearing had just walked in and taken a seat behind the bench. Still, no one spoke the truth aloud. No one said that's her son. Not yet. Ramsey turned the dog tag over one more time, like he couldn't resist rubbing salt in the wound. "Doesn't look like regulation to me," he muttered to the prosecutor. Renata Freeman took a breath. Calm, cold. And then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was even, measured, professional. "Deputy Ramsey," she said, eyes on the tag, "was the defendant under arrest at the time you confiscated this item?" Ramsey blinked. "No, ma'am." "Did you file a seizure report?" "I was about to." "Was there any indication that the item posed a threat to court security?" Ramsey hesitated. "Well, not exactly, but—" She held up a hand. The room fell still. Her tone was crisp now, sharper. "I ask because the removal of personal property from a minor, without probable cause, without a warrant, without a report, constitutes not only a breach of protocol, but a potential violation of civil rights." Ramsey opened his mouth, closed it again. The smirk finally faded, and still, no one in the courtroom quite understood what was coming next, because none of them had pieced it together. None of them knew that the boy who sat so quietly, so still, was not just another defendant to Judge Renata Freeman. He was her child, her son, her blood. And Ramsey had just tried to reduce him to a spectacle. In her courtroom, in front of her bench, under her watch. The room didn't know it yet, but a reckoning had already begun. Deputy Cole Ramsey didn't see the blade being sharpened. That's the danger of arrogance. It makes you blind. He stood in the center of the courtroom with the dog tag swinging lightly between his fingers, dangling it like a souvenir instead of what it truly was. A memorial, a memory, a tether between a boy and the brother he'd buried. His voice didn't tremble. His posture didn't shrink. He still thought this was his moment. Still thought he was the authority in the room. "Your Honor," he began, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this item was worn inappropriately by the defendant. It resembles military identification, but without verification, it could just as easily be gang-related, or part of some impersonation effort. You know how that goes these days." The words hung there, coated in implication, dripping with stereotype. A teenage black boy wearing a military tag? Couldn't possibly be legit. Had to be a front. A lie. Something criminal. Malik didn't move. He sat at the defense table, fists tight in his lap, eyes forward, neck still tingling from where the chain had been yanked. His jaw clenched so hard it ached, but he said nothing. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't need to. Not anymore. Judge Renata Freeman, seated behind the bench in a posture of razor-sharp stillness, slowly removed her glasses and folded them gently in front of her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. But the air changed as soon as her mouth opened. "Deputy Ramsey," she said, calm as a pond, "you're presenting this item to the court as potential evidence of impersonation or gang affiliation?" Ramsey nodded, puffing his chest slightly. "Yes, ma'am." She blinked once. "On what basis?" Ramsey hesitated, just half a beat. "It resembles military credentials," he said. But the boy, the defendant, was unable to provide documentation. No proof of service. The courtroom was dead quiet now. Even the bailiff had stopped moving. The stenographer's fingers hovered mid-air, waiting for the moment they all felt coming. "So," Judge Freeman said slowly, "you are suggesting that this minor, who was not under arrest, not being searched, and not posing a threat, was wearing a piece of metal that, in your view, justifies public seizure and character defamation?" "I wouldn't call it defamation," Ramsey replied, still grasping for control. "It's a security precaution. These days, you can't be too careful." A pause, long, measured. Judge Freeman tilted her head ever so slightly. "And did you ask him where it came from?" Ramsey blinked. He said it belonged to his brother. But anyone can say that. People lie. Her tone didn't change. It didn't need to. "Deputy," she said softly, "you took a chain off a child's neck without cause. You did so in front of witnesses. You did not file a report. You did not log it as evidence until I asked. And now you are standing in my courtroom trying to frame this as procedure?" Ramsey opened his mouth, then closed it, because he could feel it now. The shift. The room was no longer with him. They were watching, waiting, and then Judge Freeman leaned forward just slightly, just enough to pierce the space between them with truth. "And one more thing," she said. "That boy you humiliated in the hallway? The one whose property you confiscated like he didn't belong here? He's my son." The words cracked through the courtroom like a whip. Gasps, audible, from the gallery, from the clerks. Even the prosecutor's pen slipped across her notepad and scratched a crooked line into the margin. Ramsey froze. Malik's head turned just slightly toward the bench, and Lorraine, sitting tall in the second row, let out a breath so steady it felt like release. Judge Freeman didn't blink. "His name is Malik Darius Freeman," she continued, voice now carrying not just authority, but gravity. "He is 16 years old. He is a straight-A student. And that chain you held up like it was contraband? It belonged to his older brother, my son, Corporal Darius Freeman, United States Marine Corps, killed in action 4 years ago while evacuating civilians from a combat zone in Kandahar." The silence was absolute. Ramsey had no smirk left. He didn't even have a word, because now everything was exposed. Judge Freeman leaned back slightly, but her eyes never left him. "You didn't know that," she said, "but that's not the problem. The problem is, you didn't care. You saw a black boy with quiet dignity and assumed criminality. You saw military tags and assumed impersonation. You saw calm, and you mistook it for defiance. And worse, you assumed no one in that hallway would stop you." A long pause. "You were almost right." Ramsey's face had gone pale. His hands, the same ones that had so casually snatched the dog tag minutes ago, now rested awkwardly at his sides. Judge Freeman looked down at the chain now sitting on the defense table, where the public defender had quietly placed it, gently, as if it might break. "You didn't just violate policy," she said. "You violated dignity. You stripped a child of something sacred. And then you brought it into my courtroom like a prize." She looked up again. "And now you will be held accountable." The room didn't breathe. No one moved. Because the story had flipped, mid-sentence, and the man who thought he ran the room now stood at its center, exposed, dismantled, and completely alone. Judge Freeman turned to the clerk. "Let the record show that the item has been returned to its rightful owner," she said, "that no criminal behavior was observed, and that no procedural grounds existed for its removal." She turned back to Ramsey. "You will be escorted from this courtroom. Effective immediately, you are barred from participating in any court-related proceedings in this building until a formal inquiry is complete." Ramsey tried to speak. "Your Honor, with respect—" "No," she said, sharper now. "You forfeited the right to speak the moment you put your hands on my son." She nodded to the bailiff. "Please escort Deputy Ramsey to the lobby." The bailiff moved, quick but calm. Ramsey stepped back, still trying to find words, still trying to understand how the power he'd clung to like armor had turned into chains. But it was done. The court had seen. The courtroom murmured again, this time not with shock, but with something else. Recognition. A collective knowing. A quiet, rising awareness that something had happened here that couldn't be walked back, couldn't be forgotten. Malik sat still. His chain, his brother's name, was back where it belonged. And Ramsey was the one being forced to walk away in silence. This time the silence was his. The doors clicked shut behind Deputy Cole Ramsey, and the silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was heavy, pulsing, alive with something more than shock. It was a silence of reckoning, the kind that doesn't ask for applause but demands memory, the kind that wraps itself around the walls and lingers in the corners long after the man at the center of it all is gone. Judge Renata Freeman hadn't moved. She remained seated behind the bench, spine tall, face unreadable, though her voice still carried the weight of truth like a gavel in flight. The echo of her final words to Ramsey hadn't faded, and yet the room already knew this was not over. Not by a long shot. She took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, but necessary. Then she reached for the document in front of her. Her fingers were steady, her composure locked in place. But those who were truly paying attention, the court clerks, the bailiff, the young lawyer beside Malik, could sense it. Beneath that calm exterior, something seismic had shifted. "A formal complaint regarding Deputy Ramsey's conduct has already been initiated," she said, her voice even but no longer neutral. "This courtroom will forward all documentation and hallway surveillance to the Department of Internal Affairs." Her eyes swept the room, pausing just long enough on each face to remind them that what had happened wasn't fiction, wasn't exaggeration, wasn't going to be tucked away in paperwork and quiet HR emails. "What occurred here today was not just inappropriate," she continued. "It was unlawful, it was humiliating, and it violated both court policy and the ethical responsibilities expected of officers sworn to uphold the law." There it was, unlawful, humiliating, words that had long been used to describe the behavior of defendants, especially young black boys like Malik. But today, those words had changed direction. Today, they pointed at the uniform, not the hoodie. Malik sat in silence at the defense table. His public defender beside him had gone still, her hands resting atop her folder, knuckles pale. And in the second row, Lorraine Freeman gripped the handle of her cane with both hands, her eyes wet but unwavering. The dog tag rested on the table now, no longer swinging, no longer a prop. It lay there quietly, as it always had, until someone made it something else. Judge Freeman looked at it for a long moment, long enough to feel everything it carried. Darius's name, his sacrifice, the silence that followed his death. And now, this courtroom, where his memory had been dragged through suspicion before being returned to sanctity. With slow precision, she continued, Let the record also show, she said, that the defendant, Malik Freeman, arrived in this courtroom under the pretense of a school disciplinary hearing, one which, after review, has been found to lack substantial evidence. She paused to let that land. The gallery shifted. Quiet murmurs passed between those seated. The school's claim of a disruptive incident has no supporting testimony that meets evidentiary standards. No corroborating witness, no physical harm, no pattern of prior offenses. She looked at Malik then, just for a second, and in that second, the mask slipped just a little. She wasn't just a judge, she was a mother looking at her son. A son who had just had his dignity torn away in front of a room full of strangers, but also a son who had not flinched, had not raised his voice, had not retaliated when given every reason to do so. She looked back at the document. Therefore, she said, this court dismisses all charges against Mr. Freeman with prejudice. The words hit like a final stone placed on a headstone, not of Malik's case, but of Ramsey's control. With prejudice, meaning not just dismissed, meaning it will never return. There was no slow-motion applause, no standing ovation, just a shift in the room, a collective exhale from those who had been holding their breath without realizing it. Malik's attorney looked at him. "It's over," she whispered. But Malik didn't smile. He nodded, slowly, quietly, his hand moving across the table to rest on the dog tag. He picked it up, gently, and looped the chain back around his neck. It felt heavier now, not because of the metal, but because of what it had survived. What he had survived. And still, Judge Freeman wasn't finished. "I will be submitting a judicial report directly to the Oversight Board," she said, now addressing the gallery more broadly, and requesting that Internal Affairs provide a complete review of not only today's actions, but of Deputy Ramsey's prior conduct, complaint history, and disciplinary records. The people in the courtroom didn't speak, but their expressions said everything. Some were stunned. Some quietly nodded. A few, those who had known Ramsey for years, just looked away, eyes on their shoes, lips tight, as if trying to disassociate from the man they had worked beside but never questioned. She turned back to Malik, and though her voice remained level, her eyes said what her position would not allow her to say aloud. "I'm proud of you." "You may be excused," she said simply. Malik stood. He didn't rush. He didn't look at Ramsey's empty spot, or the officers still frozen in place. He didn't search the room for approval or applause. He just walked, quietly, straight-backed, the dog tag resting against his chest again like armor that had never been taken from him, only tested. As he passed the bench, his mother gave no outward sign. She didn't nod, didn't smile, but as he neared the door, she said, softly, so only he could hear it, "You didn't lose today." He paused, just slightly. "You made them look." Then he kept walking, the courtroom behind him still wrapped in silence. But it was a different silence now. It wasn't the silence of complicity. It was the silence of people realizing the cost of turning away. The silence of a courtroom that had just watched a system correct itself. If only for a moment. Outside, the sun had moved higher in the sky. The light was harsh, bright, real. Lorraine joined Malik on the courthouse steps, her hand slipping into the crook of his arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He had stood his ground. The badge hadn't won this time, and for the first time in a long while, the silence belonged to someone else. The ripple began not with a bang, but with a click. A low-resolution video uploaded anonymously at 2:17 that afternoon. Just 10 seconds long. No sound. Just a blurry clip from the courthouse hallway's security camera, slightly angled, time-stamped in white at the bottom right. It showed a uniformed officer, Deputy Cole Ramsey, stepping forward with a predator's calm and yanking a chain off the neck of a seated black teenager. The moment the clasp snapped was unmistakable. Even without sound, the violence was clear. The boy flinched. The officer stood tall. And behind the desk, just out of focus, the boy's grandmother stiffened like a storm pulling in air before the strike. The video caption was simple. He didn't know the judge was the boy's mother. That was all it took. By 4 o'clock, the video had 11,000 views. By 6, it had crossed 100,000. By the time Malik Freeman had eaten dinner and tried, unsuccessfully, to pretend the day was behind him, it had made its way to Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and half a dozen local news feeds. It was no longer a video. It was a story. The still image, the exact frame where Ramsey's hand gripped the chain, Malik recoiling, face expressionless, became a freeze-frame symbol of something much older than 10 seconds of hallway footage. It became proof. Proof of what too many people had claimed and been ignored for. Proof that dignity wasn't just stolen in dramatic gestures, it was stolen in small, routine ones, too. The kind that happened in hallways, in silence, in front of everyone. The hashtags began to spread. Chain of command. Heard Malik Freeman. He didn't know. Such a sense, and this is why we look down. Comment sections filled with outrage, with grief, with reflection, and, as always, with backlash. But the overwhelming tide was undeniable. Something about the story hit different. It wasn't just about a boy and a chain. It was about presumption. About how quickly power could become violence, and how often no one was held to account. Until now, people started to dig. Journalists, advocates, anonymous Twitter accounts with long memories. By the next morning, 3 other incidents involving Ramsey surfaced. One from 5 months earlier at a juvenile detention intake center, where a teenage girl accused him of unnecessary force. Another from 2 years ago involving a 16-year-old boy detained without cause at a community center. And a third, older and quieter, buried deep in a complaint file from nearly a decade ago. An unfiled report alleging verbal harassment during a school drug sweep. No charges had been filed in any of those cases. The stories had slipped through the cracks. Until now. Now the cracks were flooded with light. Local outlets began covering it first. Channel 5, WNBR News. Even the smaller neighborhood blog that usually posted bake sales and garbage pickup schedules. But by the end of the day, national media had latched on. The headlines varied, but the core was the same. Deputy caught on video assaulting teen in courthouse. Unaware judge was the boy's mother. Power misused, caught, and reversed. The Freeman courtroom incident. Justice in real time. The chain that sparked a fire. Talk shows mentioned it. Radio stations debated it. Twitter turned it into a symbol. TikTok users stitched videos of Malik standing in court with text overlays and slow music. Someone turned the judge's quote, "You didn't know who he was, but you knew what he looked like, and that was enough for you," into a spoken-word track layered with protest footage and candlelight visuals. It spread like wildfire. Malik watched it unfold from the living room couch, half in disbelief, half in quiet retreat. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from people he barely knew. Some he hadn't spoken to in years. Some just sent a single emoji. Others typed full paragraphs about their own experiences, about how they'd never seen someone stay that calm, about how his silence had spoken louder than they thought possible. His grandmother, Lorraine, didn't watch the videos. She didn't need to. "I was there," she said softly when he offered. "I saw the first cut. I don't need the replay." But she did keep the newspaper when the story hit the front page, folded it carefully, slid it into a drawer with other clippings from a life spent resisting quietly. Meanwhile, at the sheriff's department, Ramsey was facing a silence of a different kind. Doors that had always opened for him now closed without warning. Voices that used to greet him turned away. He wasn't suspended yet, not officially, but he had been placed under administrative review, which everyone knew was code for. Your name just became a liability. He paced his office like a man waiting for a verdict, fingers twitching toward his phone, rereading the statement from the department over and over. We take these matters seriously. An internal investigation is underway. He hated that word, seriously. It meant nothing. It was what you said when you were cornered. By day 3, reporters had camped outside his home. The sheriff issued a follow-up press release confirming that Deputy Ramsey would not be returning to court duty pending the outcome of the investigation. Inside the courtroom, Judge Freeman said nothing more on the subject. Her robe remained pressed, her tone unchanged. But every person who walked into that chamber walked differently now. Lighter, straighter, more aware, because something had cracked. Not broken, not fully, but cracked wide enough for light to get in. Malik returned to school 4 days after the incident. His hallway was a mix of stairs and silence. Some kids nodded, some looked away. A few clapped when he passed. He didn't stop. He didn't smile. He didn't seek attention. But one kid, maybe 14, maybe younger, caught up to him by the lockers and said, "I saw the video. What you did, that was brave." Malik looked at him and replied simply, "I didn't do anything." The kid shook his head. "Yeah," he said, "that's what made it powerful." That night, Malik sat on the porch with his grandmother. The chain around his neck caught the evening light, its metal no longer shining like a target, but like a truth that refused to be denied. "They're saying it might go federal," she said quietly. Malik didn't answer right away. Then he asked, "You think it'll change anything?" Lorraine leaned back in her chair, eyes soft on the horizon. "It already did," she said. And across the city, across the state, across the timeline of a country too often numb to these moments, people watched and remembered. Because the chain was never just metal. It was memory, and now it was movement. The sun had just started its slow climb above the rooftops when Malik stepped outside. The morning air in the neighborhood was thick with August humidity, but it carried something else, too. Something quieter than fame, deeper than headlines. It was recognition. Not the kind that screams your name or points fingers or asks for selfies. This was the kind that lives in nods, in held eye contact, in moments of stillness that say, "I saw what you did. I understand what it meant." He didn't walk like a celebrity. He didn't walk like a martyr. He walked like a boy whose body still remembered how cold that courtroom was, how heavy silence could be, and how strange it was to have the whole world talking while you yourself had barely spoken a word. The streets weren't crowded, but they weren't empty either. A group of younger kids rode their bikes along the sidewalk, their wheels rattling over cracks and roots. One of them, maybe 12, maybe 13, looked up as Malik passed. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just nodded. Malik nodded back. He turned the corner toward the school, the brick building already buzzing in the distance with the sound of first bells and rustling backpacks. But he didn't go in. Not yet. He stopped at the edge of the gym wall where something new was blooming on the paint. A mural in progress. It was maybe halfway finished. The boy in the mural was taller than life, silhouetted in warm tones against a backdrop of soft gold and gray. His posture was upright, not defiant, not aggressive, just present, centered, grounded. Around his neck, painted with near photorealistic detail, hung a silver dog tag. It shimmered even in the shade, catching morning light in the grooves of Darius's engraved name. The words beneath it weren't finished, just sketched in charcoal for now. But Malik could read them clearly. Stillness is not absence. An older man, one of the local artists, Someone Malik had seen around, paused from his work, and nodded at him from the scaffold. "Won't take long now," he said, wiping his brush on a rag. "Might even get it sealed before school lets out." Malik said nothing, just stared. The dog tag looked so familiar, so right. It didn't make him feel famous. It made him feel known. Later that evening, he sat on the porch beside his grandmother, both of them quiet, both of them watching the sky fade from blue to burnt orange. Lorraine Freeman rocked gently, her cane resting beside her, a glass of sweet tea balanced on the armrest. She hadn't said much in the days since everything changed, since the story became national, since the courthouse got quieter, since the phone stopped ringing as much and people stopped asking for interviews. But Malik knew she was thinking. He could feel it in the way her foot tapped once every few seconds, rhythmic, thoughtful. "You know," she said finally, her voice low, "when your brother left for boot camp, he told me he didn't want to make a name for himself. He just wanted to show up right. Said there was too much noise in the world already." Malik didn't respond at first. He let the words settle. "I didn't fight," he said after a while. "Didn't shout, didn't even raise my hand." Lorraine turned to look at him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "But I didn't vanish either." She smiled at that, not wide, but proud. Quietly proud. "No, baby," she said, "you didn't." He ran a hand over his chest, fingers brushing the chain now resting, whole again, against his skin. Darius's tag returned, polished clean by time. Not apology. "Wasn't even supposed to be a big hearing," Malik said. "It was about some words in a hallway. Misunderstood fight. I didn't think it would mean anything." Lorraine sipped her tea. "That's the thing about moments," she said. "You don't know what they'll become until they're already changing people." Down the street, someone honked. A door slammed. A radio played an old blues song through an open window. Life was still happening, but it felt different now, like the volume had shifted, like people were listening better, looking closer. The porch creaked as the screen door opened behind them. Judge Renata Freeman stepped outside, her black robe long gone, replaced with jeans and a faded T-shirt that said, "Truth has a mother." Her hair was tied back, her eyes soft but focused. She handed Malik a plate, fried fish, cornbread, collard greens, and sat on the step below him, where she could look up at him without towering. For the first time in days, she didn't have to speak from a bench. She could speak as his mother. "They asked if I wanted to recuse myself," she said after a bite of cornbread. "Said it might look too personal, too emotional, too close." Malik tilted his head. "What did you say?" "I said, damn right it's personal. That was my child. That was my courtroom. And that officer thought both were up for grabs." She turned to face him fully. "Power's not always loud, Malik," she said. "Sometimes it's just showing up, not shrinking, making them look at what they tried to ignore." He nodded slowly. "That's what it felt like. Like if I shrank, they'd win. But if I sat still, they'd have to look." She smiled at him, wide now, a mother's smile. "And that," she said, "is how we change the chain of command." They sat there as the sky turned purple and the stars tried to blink through the haze. The tag around his neck glinted faintly in the porch light. A simple piece of metal, yes, but also a story. A symbol. A wound, healed in part. A legacy. Passed forward. Malik didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a victim either. He felt present. And sometimes, in a world that counts shouting as power and anger as proof, presence was the most radical thing of all. He had not vanished, and now they couldn't unsee him. What happened to Malik Freeman wasn't just about one boy, one badge, or one courtroom. It was a mirror held up to America. It showed us, in real time, how dignity can be dismissed in seconds, and how silence can either bury the truth or sharpen it into something unbreakable. Malik didn't fight back with fists. He didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He stayed present. And in doing so, he forced a system that often looks the other way to look directly at itself. His stillness shattered assumptions. His silence spoke louder than outrage. And when his mother, Judge Renata Freeman, revealed who he was, it wasn't just a twist, it was a reckoning. The chain ripped from his neck became a chain reaction. Within 3 days, the video had gone viral. Within a week, an internal affairs investigation had been launched. By the end of the month, other victims came forward, painting a bigger picture of abuse long buried in silence. This wasn't a fluke. It was a lesson. A lesson in how racism often hides behind routine. How power, left unchecked, turns ordinary acts into quiet violence. But most of all, it was a reminder to parents, to teachers, to neighbors, to every American, that presence matters. When you stand up, even without speaking, you break the lie that says your voice has to be loud to be heard. And so now, the question turns to you. What will you do with this story? Will you forget it by morning? Or will you remember what a dog tag taught an entire courtroom? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Show it to someone who still thinks silence means guilt. Subscribe to this channel so stories like Malik's don't disappear beneath the noise. Like the video if you believe truth doesn't need to yell to change the world. Because in America today, change doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from 1 million people remembering the same one. Malik Freeman didn't vanish. And now, it's your turn to make sure this moment doesn't either. Be the witness. Be the echo. Be part of the chain that cannot be broken.